Keeper of the Lost Cities by Shannon Messenger. Chapter 5. Stop! Sophie screamed as her whole body started to shake. Her vision dimmed and blackness clouded her mind. But Sandor grabbed her arm and yanked her behind him, and the jarring motion pulled her out of the frenzy. "Who goes there?" Sandor demanded. "I don't answer to you, goblin," the taller figure called in a dry, snooty voice. Sandor drew a handful of star-shaped blades from his pockets, a bit like ninja stars, but with longer points and spiraled edges. "You have 3 seconds to identify yourselves, or I will use these, and I assure you my aim is flawless." "What's going on there?" Grady shouted as he rushed up behind them. He put one hand protectively on Sophie's shoulder as he squinted at the figures. "Viker? Timken? Is that you?" One of the figures tossed her hood back, sweeping her wavy brown hair out of her eyes. Who else would it be? The last of the dark fog cleared from Sophie's mind, leaving traces of a headache. It wasn't them. Though the Huskies were almost as bad, especially since Sophie knew who the third figure was even before she swept back her hood, revealing a scowling face and a mass of frizzy brown curls. "Stina," Sophie grumbled, glaring at the girl who went out of her way to make her life miserable at school. "What are you doing here?" Stina tugged on Sylvain's harness. "We are here to collect the alicorn so it can be properly rehabilitated." "Calm," Sophie transmitted as Sylvain's panic flooded her mind. "I won't let her take you." She was amazed Sylvain had even let them get close enough to attach the reins. Clearly she needed to teach the glittering horse how to recognize pure evil. "I wasn't aware that had been decided," Grady said, tightening his grip on Sophie's shoulder as she tried to step forward. "Please, you didn't think they'd have you rehabilitate the alicorn, did you?" Timken asked as he jerked Sylvain's reins toward him. "A noble creature deserves a noble trainer." "Last I heard, your wife was the only one appointed to the nobility," Grady corrected, "and only as a regent, not an emissary." "Give it time," Timken growled, yanking Sylvain's reins so hard he wrenched the frightened horse's neck. "Regents, emissary noble, Sophie didn't care." "You're hurting her!" she screamed as she lunged toward the enclosure. Sandor blocked her. "We are doing nothing of the sort," Viker snapped back. "I can feel her pain," Sophie insisted. Stina laughed, her high, wheezy snicker. "Last I checked, empathy wasn't an ability your creators gave you. Last I checked, you hadn't manifested any abilities at all." Sophie spit through gritted teeth. "And I don't have to be an empath. I can feel her emotions with my mind." Timken snorted. "That's impossible. If it were coming from anyone else, I'd agree with you." A voice with an unmistakably crisp accent announced. "But you're forgetting how remarkable Sophie is." Sophie spun around, relieved when she found 4 figures still glittering from their leap into the pasture. Alden, tall and regal in his dark blue cape, stood beside a beautiful girl, Sophie's age with long dark hair. On her other side were 2 teenage boys, one with dark hair and impossibly teal eyes, and one with disheveled blonde hair and his trademark smirk. Bianna and Fitz stared in wonder at Sylvain. Keith grinned at Sophie. "Yeah, Foster's always doing crazy things no one can understand. It's how she keeps up her sense of mystery." "Lord Alden," Timken said, lowering his hood and shaking his black hair as he dipped an exaggerated bow. "An honor, as always." "No need for ceremony, Timken." Alden turned to Grady. "I'm sorry to be late. I'd hoped to get here before the Huskies arrived. But Fitz, Keith and Biana insisted on seeing the long-lost alicorn, and someone needed time to fix their hair. "Hey, a guy's got to look his best for the ladies." Keith patted the back of his head. "Right, Foster?" Sophie ignored him, though she could feel her cheeks blushing. She turned to Alden. "Please, you can't let them take Sylvie." "He doesn't answer to you," Stina announced. "He answers to the council, and I'm sure they've told him to give her to us." "That was their plan," Alden admitted. The Hex family has had tremendous success rehabilitating unicorns using their empathetic abilities, and it was Viker's grandmother who rehabilitated the alicorn in the sanctuary, so it seems only logical to let them prepare Sylvie. "But she hates them," Sylvie whinnied, like she agreed. "Can you really feel what she's feeling?" Alden asked. "Yes, right now she's scared and angry and wants to get away from them." "She's making that up." Viker dragged Sylvie close enough to put her hand on her shimmery neck. "I feel nothing of the sort, and I actually am an empath." An image flashed into Sophie's mind, and she couldn't help grinning. "Sylvie wants to bite your hand." "You can't possibly know that." But Viker whipped her hand away awfully fast for someone who didn't believe. Sylvie took advantage of her distraction, jerking her harness so hard she knocked Viker and Timikin to the muddy ground of her enclosure. They dropped their reins as they fell, and Sylvie galloped toward the opposite end of her pasture, dragging Stina through the mud until she finally let go. Sophie raced to the purple bars and had just enough time to reach through and unhook the buckle on Sylvie's harness before the others caught up. The grateful horse spread her wings and flew to the highest part of her bared home. Viker snatched Sophie's wrist with a mud-streaked hand. "You wretched girl! Call her down right now!" "Why do you need my help? Aren't you the expert?" Keith snickered. "Oh, good one, Foster." "Shut up!" Viker hissed, tightening her grip. "Unhand her!" Sandor growled, and Sophie heard a scrape of metal like he'd unsheathed his sword. Viker glared at him for a second, and then shoved Sophie back, sending her tumbling into Fitz's arms. "You okay?" he asked, flashing his movie star-worthy smile as he steadied her. She was fairly certain her face was on fire as she pulled away and mumbled, "Yeah, thanks." "How exactly are you communicating with the alicorn?" Alden asked her. "I'm not sure. Sometimes it's just a bunch of images flashing through my mind. Sometimes it feels like she's filling my head with her emotions, making me feel them too. Sometimes it's her word, but it's..." "A word?" Alden interrupted. Timken's laugh was a sharp, ugly bark of sound. "You expect us to believe that?" "How else would I know her name's Sylvie?" Sylvie nickered. "That could just be a coincidence," Stina argued. "I bet she'd respond to anything. Sylvie, Sylvie. Sylvie didn't so much as glance at her. "Sylvie," Timken whispered. Not only did Sylvie nicker, she dive-bombed all three of them, making them drop to the mud to avoid being knocked over. Alden smiled. "I think that settles that." Viker tried to wipe the dirt off her face, but only succeeded in smearing it more as she stumbled to her feet. "I don't see why this matters. I'm sure the council's already given the order for us to take her, Alden." "Doesn't Sylvie get any say?" Sophie asked him. "Of course she doesn't!" Timken shouted. "Animals live where we tell them to live. They are not intelligent creatures." "Surely I must have misheard you, Timken," Alden said quietly. "None of us would ever imply a lack of respect for a living being, especially someone with noble aspirations." Timken's features bent into thin, angry lines, but he said nothing more than, "Indeed." Alden nodded. "Then I'm sure you would also agree that if Sylvie can communicate her wishes, we should respect them. The question is, what does she want?" "She wants to stay here," Sophie announced. Stina rolled her eyes. Please, she's just making that up so she can keep the alicorn for herself. I think the mud streaking your clothes make it pretty clear how Sylvie feels about you, Grady pointed out. But we rehabilitated the other alicorn. Like I argued, not you personally. And that was before we had Sophie, Alden reminded her. Her unique abilities make her better equipped. You can't be serious. I am, I'm afraid. The council wants Sylvie to receive the best care, and since Sophie has a means of communicating with her far beyond your capabilities, Havenfield is the better choice. Monica's eyes narrowed as she stalked as close to Alden as the bars of the enclosure would allow. You can bet the council will be hearing about this. Of course they will. I'll be sending them a full report as soon as I get home. That's part of my job as an emissary, as in rendering final decisions in matters such as this. Unbelievable, Timken muttered as he fished a pathfinder from his muddy cape and held the slender silver wand up to the sunlight. Trusting that freak of a child, no wonder I'm hearing whispers of the council's incompetence. The huskies leaped away before anyone could respond. Alden released a long, heavy sigh. Sophie stared at the ground, wishing there were a hole she could crawl in to hide. Instead, she called Sylvie down and stroked her gleaming mane. Calm, they're gone. Is the unrest getting worse? Grady asked Alden. Sophie tugged out an eyelash as Alden hesitated to answer. Crimes like kidnapping were supposed to be unheard of in the elven world, as were rebellious and underground groups and conspiracies to burn down the human world. Her and Dick's dramatic escape had been the rude awakening no one wanted, and as the weeks passed with no sign of the culprits, more and more people had begun questioning the council as leaders. We are doing our best to keep it under control, Alden finally replied. Though, if we had another emissary, you know I can't. I know, and the alicorn will help tremendously. She could solve everything. Sylvie snorted, and Sophie couldn't help wondering how such a stinky creature could be so important. I do have some information for you about that other matter, Alden added, leading Grady out of earshot. Not that Sophie couldn't have guessed what they were talking about. It always had something to do with her. You okay? Bjorn asked, coming to stand beside her. You're not what they called you. You know that, right? Sophie shrugged, not looking at her. She'd been called a freak her whole life, and she couldn't care less what Stina said. But ever since the kidnapping, she'd been hearing it from other people too. Everyone knew about her strange abilities now, and her mysterious connection to the Black Swan, and no one seemed to know what to do with that information. Biana's right, Fitz said, dragging her out of her gloomy thoughts. Don't let what they said get to you. We all think your talents are awesome. Sophia was proud of herself for not jumping as Fitz's deep accented voice filled her head. Fitz had helped her pull herself back from the light when she was fading, and ever since, he'd become the only telepath who could transmit thoughts into her mind. He still couldn't hear what she was thinking, something she was eternally grateful for, and she could block him if she wanted to. But she didn't want to, though his thoughts did feel strangely wrong, too loud and too warm, like his transmissions were mixed with a hairdryer whirring in her head. But he probably had to make his thoughts stronger to get past her blocking, and she'd gladly take the slight headache to keep the secret conversations. Thanks, she transmitted back. You really don't think it's weird that I can talk to Sylvie? Are you kidding? I wish you could teach me how to do it. Sophie smiled. I can try. Hey, what did I tell you about secret telepathic conversations? Keith asked as he shoved his way between them. Unless you're talking about me, Keep it out loud. Fitz laughed. Keith just wishes he could swap secret messages with you. Please, I don't need your little mind tricks. I can feel Foster's secrets. He fanned the air around her. And I feel some pretty intense emotions right now. Probably because I'm wondering if I should strangle you or beat you with my shoe. The shoe would be funnier, Fitz jumped in. Sophie smiled. Might be a bad idea to do it in front of a member of the nobility, though. No, my dad would understand. I'm pretty sure he dreams about doing the same thing. Keith smirked at both of them. Bring it on. I'd be careful if I were you, Keith, Biana warned. Remember, Sophie's an inflictor. Biana said it with a smile, but it still made Sophie want to hide. If she lost her temper, she could seriously hurt somebody, and she had no idea how to control it. She'd almost done it to the Huskies when they were trying to take Sylvie, and she'd accidentally incapacitated Sandor the first time she saw him. She'd never forget the way his muscled body collapsed to the floor, writhing in pain. No one should have the ability to do that to someone. A strange, soothing warmth filled Sophie's mind, almost like Sylvie was trying to comfort her. But a horse couldn't do that, could she? Sophie stepped closer to the bars, stroking Sylvie's velvet nose. Calm, Sylvie transmitted. Sophie's eyes widened. Oh, I almost forgot to show you, Biana said, holding out her wrist and breaking whatever connection Sophie and Sylvie had. Notice anything different? You got your Nexus off. Biana nodded proudly. It unlatched yesterday after I leaped home from shopping with my mom. That's 5 weeks earlier than Fitz. And she won't let me forget it. Fitz had some sort of record with his Nexus unlatched when he was 13. Most kids were 15 or 16 before the concentration levels were strong enough to let them safely light leap on their own. At least I still beat Keith, Fitz said, grinning at his friend. He'll probably be the only one in our grade level still wearing one. Hey, only because I'm a year ahead. Still, don't you turn 15 soon? Fitz asked him. Keith rolled his eyes. Not that soon. Besides, let's not forget that Foster beat us all. Her level's been full since we latched her new Nexus on. Yeah, but she doesn't count because Elvin's making her wear it anyway, Biana retorted. No offense, she added, looking at Sophie. Sophie shrugged and stared at the full meter on the underside of her Nexus. Much as she hated it, Biana was right. After she faded, Elvin had tweaked her latch so that it would only undock when he decided she was ready, and not a second sooner. Keith nudged her. So you gonna fly us around on your new pet, or what? You think she'd let me do that? Sophie's mind filled with an image of her being whisked through the sky on Sylvie's back. Fly? She transmitted, sending Sylvie the same scene. Fly! Sylvie transmitted back. Fly, fly, fly! Only one way to find out, Keith added. Not a chance, Grady said as he and Alden rejoined them. We don't need to add falling from the sky to Sophie's list of injuries. Sophie glared at everyone as they laughed. You're really lucky, Sophie, Biana added, her eyes stretching wide as Sylvie flapped her wings. She's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. She is, isn't she? Keith groaned. What is it with girls and sparkles? Sparkles make everything better, Biana informed him, and Sophie had to agree. You don't think she's amazing? Sophie asked him. Give me something that shoots fire any day. Or stinky gas, Fitz added, elbowing him. A gallon, maybe? I'm definitely a fan of gallons. Legend had it that Keith had been the mastermind behind something called the Great Gallon Incident, but Sophie still had no clue what had actually transpired. Yes, well, we can discuss your delinquency another time, Keith, Alden said, reaching into the pocket of his cape and retrieving his pathfinder. Sophie and Grady have an important day ahead of them. Oh, you guys are going to Atlantis for the Euripid races. I heard they sometimes claw their way into the stands, and Keith's voice trailed off when he noticed the warning look Alden was shooting him. Oh, right. Everyone became very interested in their feat. 16 years ago, to the day, Grady and Edelyn had lost their only daughter in a tragic fire, and every year on the anniversary of the loss, they went to visit her grave. I'm sorry, my friend, Alden said, moving close enough to squeeze Grady's shoulder. Me too, Fitz added, quietly, echoed by Bianna and Keith. Grady looked away, wiping his eyes, but Sophie glanced at her friends, surprised to see how sad they seemed. Death was such a rare occurrence for elves that most of them didn't understand it or feel the right amount of sympathy. She was about to wonder what brought on the change when a blurry memory flashed through her mind. A devastated Fitz, holding the small albatrosaurus she'd given him during midterms, and telling her he'd been to her funeral. She'd been so heavily drugged by her kidnappers that she had no idea how much of that was real and how much of it was a delusion she'd created as she desperately tried to call for help. But she did know that for about 2 weeks, everyone thought she and Dex were dead. It was strange to imagine her friends mourning for her. She buried the morbid thought as Bianna asked, Do you want to come over tomorrow? Not sure. I'll let you know, okay? Fitz nodded. Bianna nodded. Fitz waved, and Keith told her to have fun with her sparkly horse as Alden held his pathfinder to the light. I'll be thinking of you, my friend, Alden told Grady, and Sophie, we'll talk soon. The light pulled them away before she could ask why. Grady stood there, staring into space like he wasn't sure where to go now. Or maybe he wasn't ready. You don't have to come today, he told Sophie after a second. It's not an easy thing to do. I know. She wrapped her arms around him, wishing she could squeeze away the sadness in his voice. But I want to come. Grady sank into the hug, and an extra second passed before he pulled away, his eyes blinking back tears. He cleared his throat and took her hands. Well then, we'd better get ready.